You're listening to the For I Will Be With You podcast. For I Will Be With You. Daily reflections on recovery from the Bible.
Welcome back to the For I Will Be With You podcast for the 49th week of the year from December 2nd to December 8th, covering Deuteronomy 21:10 to Deuteronomy 23:18. Deuteronomy 23:10 to 23:14 describes rules of warfare for the Israelites. Moses tells the Israelites, "When you will go out to war against your enemies, and you will see among its captivity a woman who is beautiful of form, and you will desire her, you may take her to yourself for a wife. You shall bring her to the midst of your house. She shall shave her head and let her nails grow. She shall remove the garment of her captivity from upon herself, and sit in your house. And she shall weep for her father and mother for a full month. Thereafter you may come to her and live with her, and she shall be a wife to you." So this verse may seem a little bit strange or confusing from modern perspective, but what you have to understand is that in ancient times, during a war, women prisoners of the enemy were allowed to be quote-unquote married to victorious soldiers against their will. And Israel, what the Bible is saying here is that an Israelite soldier may do this, but if you read between the lines, it's discouraging the practice very strongly, saying that the soldier must let this woman grieve for her parents and her homeland in his house for a full month, her head shaved and her fine clothes removed. So what it's really saying is the soldier should let his own passions cool down about the situation and let the woman go. And the assumption here is that somehow, whether it's right or wrong, war somehow arouses passions and it's very intense. And so the soldier may see a woman he desires and want to, possess her. And what the Bible is saying is this is a very bad idea and you shouldn't do it, even if it's allowed. And so, recovery is also a little bit like going to war. It's intense. We're fighting battles against forces that are very powerful. And we can get aroused and we can make bad decisions in the heat of the moment, just like a soldier who decides that he wants to marry a woman he finds on the battlefield. And the verse gives us a way to maybe handle these situations. We need to calm down, cool off, avoid making important decisions when we're in the battle of recovery, when we're in the thick of the fight, when we're on a pink cloud of happiness or falling into a pit of despair in the recovery process. We need to guard against instant gratification or instant decisions that we may later regret and stop ourselves from plunging into mistakes that we can make when we're in the wrong frame of mind for making serious decisions. So sometimes a sponsor or other people in a meeting can be helpful to do a little reality check. Deuteronomy 21:15 to 21:16 says, "If a man will have 2 wives, one beloved and one hated, and they bear him sons, the beloved one and the hated one, and the firstborn is the hated one's, then it shall be on that day that he causes his sons to inherit whatever will be his. He cannot give the right of the firstborn to the son of the beloved one ahead of the son of the hated, the firstborn." So just to understand what this means, according to biblical law, firstborn son is entitled to a double share of inheritance. So just to keep the math simple, if you're going to leave your 2 sons in a estate of $120, your oldest son will get $80 and your younger son will get $40. Okay, that's the double portion of the firstborn. Also, in biblical times, a Jewish man could have 2 wives or more. Now, we may think from the modern perspective that that's not fair, that's barbaric or whatever, but the truth is, we still have this system in effect. It's just called serial monogamy. Many people in America, and certainly a lot of people in the program, have 1 or more ex-spouses, and they may have children with each of these spouses. So this situation is really actually quite modern. Just if you, it's not polygamy, it's just serial monogamy with children from different families. The same principles apply, meaning that you may have, unfortunately, a spouse and a child who you dislike, and a spouse and a child who you like. And that's something that you're going to have to deal with in recovery. And what the verse is telling you is very profound, very important, and difficult to deal with, which is that, we may want to start over again in recovery and find a new relationship and a new life and have a new family. That's normal. But we really owe it to everybody in the situation, ourselves and our children and our ex-partners, not to neglect them because they are part of our former life. We owe all of our children love and respect, especially if we've hurt them earlier with our addictive behavior. We need to make amends to them through acts of kindness and generosity. Deuteronomy 21:18 to 21:21 says, "If a man will have a wayward and rebellious son, who does not hearken to the voice of his father and the voice of his mother, and they discipline him, but he does not hearken to them, then his father and mother shall grasp him and take him to the elders of the city and the gate of his place. They shall say to the elders of his city, 'This son of ours is wayward and rebellious. He does not hearken to our voice. He is a glutton and a drunkard. All of the men of his city shall pelt him with stones, and he shall die.'" Wow, that sounds pretty dire, pretty drastic, right? But before we get upset, we should know that the commentators have said that this actually never took place. There was never a single case of this ever occurring in the history of the Israelite people. So there's an important. So the question is, why is this in the Bible if it's never going to happen? I guess it could happen, right? You never know. But there's a message for us in it anyway. So one way to look at this: who is this terrible, wayward son, this rebellious son? One way to look at it is he's the product of the dysfunctional family that we've just described. The family where the father went to war, brought back a new wife who he loved, and started to hate his old wife, and had a child. And the older boy from the first wife grows up to become a rebellious person. And unfortunately, this sounds like a lot of families that are around the orbit of recovery, unfortunately. Right? This could describe many so-called blended families where there are children from an earlier marriage who are not given the same attention or material life or whatever, and they may act out. There are also people in recovery who may be like this rebellious son who were neglected earlier in life or grew up in a dysfunctional family, and they acted out by drinking or overindulging in whatever food, gambling, sex, whatever it is. And I think the question to ask yourself from this verse is, and maybe this doesn't apply to you, but you can think about it even if it doesn't apply to you: should we punish our children for our own sins? Some commentators say the child is to be executed because, based on his sinful behavior as a young person, he will clearly have a future that includes robbery and murder. Right? So you can. The commentators are saying it's obvious a person who acts like this as a child will grow up to be a completely immoral and reprehensible human being who will probably commit murder. Therefore, we should kill him now. Of course, as we know, this never happened, but still a concept to think about. So maybe we can actually try and be constructive with this and say, this is like tough love, coming down hard on early signs of bad behavior to stave off a worse future for a person who is starting to succumb to addiction. So this verse is interesting. You can either be looked as like a warning not to do something, or maybe looked at as like, okay, well, maybe in some circumstances you do want to punish someone who looks like he has the potential to become much worse, as a way to get him off that path. Deuteronomy 21:22 to 21:23 says, "If a man shall have committed a sin whose judgment is death, he shall be put to death, and you shall hang him on a gallows. His body shall not remain for the night on the gallows. Rather you shall surely bury him on that day, for a hanging person is a curse of God, and you shall not contaminate your land which God, your God, gives you as an inheritance." So again, an interesting verse about justice, which seems a little bit hard to understand. Like, why is it if someone's sentenced to death, you hang him, but somehow his body hanging overnight is a curse? So what does that mean, and what can we learn from it? So if the court decides that a person is punishable by death, which is also extremely rare in Israelite times, but the laws did allow for it, what the Bible is saying is, don't compound the punishment. The punishment is death by hanging, not humiliation of public display of a dead body. So, difficult to understand what this means, but it's understandable in some circumstances. If a murderer is hated, it is tempting to humiliate him in death in this way. And God is wise to tell us to exact the punishment and move on. Acts of revenge like this are not healthy, even if they feel good at the time. Like, you may want to leave this dead body hanging overnight. Now, of course, you could bring it down to a more like sort of day-to-day level. You may be angry at someone, you may punish them in your life. What the verse is telling you is, carry out the punishment you think is appropriate, and then leave it alone. You know, if you need to tell someone that you don't approve of their behavior, and you're going to punish them in some personal way, fine. But don't drag it out. Don't make it into a big thing that it doesn't need to be. And, I think recovery, for people in addiction or people who are in recovery, the idea of revenge can excite resentments that are toxic to recovery. A good recovery happens when we can turn over a desire for revenge and focus on keeping ourselves in a positive recovery mindset. So another way to look at this is that, why is this a curse? Why is leaving a dead body hanging on the gallows overnight a curse? It says, a curse of God. So think about it like this. If you hang, man was made in God's image. If we hang a man and invite people to gawk at the dead body, in some ways we're letting people look unfavorably on God. And there's a parable that's taught by the commentators that brings this to light. It says, there was once a murderer who, just by total coincidence, was an identical twin to the king of the country. The courts caught him and they hung him. And people look at the body and they said, look, the king has been hanged. And you can think of it this way. God is our king. Excessive punishment. We can be like the people in this story. If we can look at this hanging person and say, oh, someone hung the king. Our king is hanging. Excessive punishment and revenge is therefore a desecration, or can lead to a desecration of God's name. Deuteronomy 22:1 gets onto a different topic. It says, you shall not see the ox of your brother or his sheep or goat cast off, and hide yourself from them. You shall surely return them to your brother. So this literally means that if you find a lost object, you should return it to its rightful owner. And just as a slightly interesting tangent, there is, if you learn the Talmud, the code of Jewish law, there is a tremendous amount of discussion of this issue, this seemingly simple commandment to return a lost object. That there's many permutations and questions that come up about what it really means. But the basic meaning is, don't turn away from your brother. Don't turn away from your fellow if he needs you. If he's lost something. And another way to look at it is that if you take the time to return a lost object to somebody, that person does become sort of like your brother. If you ever had someone, you're dropped like a credit card on the floor and someone brings it back to you a few minutes later in the store, you feel appreciative of that person. The person did something nice to you for you, even though they probably don't know you. And as we know, and I'm speaking very much of myself as much perhaps as anybody else listening to this, it's very natural to want to not do this and just keep walking along and pretend you didn't see whatever it is you were supposed to pick up. Obviously if it's an ox, you can't just ignore an ox, although you could, you could say, hey, it's not my problem. But what the Bible is saying is if you want to live with people in community, you need to take some responsibility for other people. Now, there's limits on this, obviously. But, for example, just to get into it a little bit, like if there's absolutely no way to know whose object this is, you can usually keep it, right? So there's different rules of this. You don't have to, spend the rest of your waking life searching for the owner of this lost object. There's certain ways to do this. But the main commandment is not to hide yourself. Don't hide yourself from your brother, right? And in recovery, this means extending ourselves to other people, even if we don't feel like it. And obviously, it's the same kind of thing. You don't have to devote your entire life to helping someone in recovery, but you can extend yourself. It could be asking someone how they're doing. If someone needs a ride, give them a ride. Little things like that will stop us from hiding ourselves from other people, and in the process, we help ourselves. Right? You help the other person, you help yourself in the process. You grow spiritually, you grow in recovery through these types of acts. Deuteronomy 22:8 says, if you build a new house, you shall make a fence for your roof, so that you will not place blood in your house if a fallen one falls from it. Okay, so this is a perplexing verse. It's a verse that sort of makes sense, but also has a lot of what are you talking about kind of things in it. In biblical times, and probably still today in some places in the world, people pick crops and they dry them, they put them on their roof to dry. There's certain crops that you have to dry out. So people used to put them on the roof. Now, so you'd have workers going up and down on ladders to the roof all day. So what the commandment is saying is put a fence around your roof so that someone doesn't fall off. Because if someone falls off your roof, it's like liability. You're responsible, whether you're responsible financially, you're sort of responsible morally anyway if you set up a situation that's dangerous. So, what the Bible's saying at a simple level is don't, expose people to dangerous things that you can control. Protect staircases, ladders, roofs, unsafe things. Fence off dangerous areas. This also means that you not fence off dangerous behaviors. This is another way to interpret this. Don't allow people in your life or yourself to fall off. People talk about falling off the wagon. Well, put a fence around the wagon. Don't fall off. Don't fall off your roof, so to speak, and fall back into drinking and using. Now, here's the other part of this verse that just begs explanation. It says, what does this mean when it says, there'll be blood on your house if a fallen one falls from it? Now, who is a fallen one? Right? It's a person. It's not just a person who falls off the roof. What this is alluding to, according to the commentators, is there are certain people who have been judged for a heavenly death penalty. There are certain sins that you can commit that will make you eligible for heavenly death. Now, not everybody believes in this, but just for the sake of argument, let's say there's certain sins you can commit where you will not be executed by an earthly court, you will be executed by the heavenly court. And so and how will this death sentence be carried out? And one of the ways that it's thought to happen is it's carried out through accidents. People might die prematurely in an accident or something, and this might be. It's a very, very bad idea to say this definitely is the cause of it, but it might be because someone was due a heavenly death sentence and they were put to death through an accident. Right? So what they're saying, what the verse is saying is that your roof without a fence might be the mechanism by which the heavenly court puts somebody to death. Okay? That's what what it means when it says if a fallen one falls from it. Now, here's the question that comes up from that. If someone has already been sentenced to death by a heavenly court, what concern is it of yours, right? But what the verse is suggesting is that even though they might be sentenced to death, your roof doesn't have to be that mechanism. There's still some sort of like blood on your house, even if you are sort of an unwitting participant in this heavenly death sentence. So it's a little confusing, but I think that what you can take out of it from recovery is an idea that help build a fence around people who you think are at risk. We have people in the program who, whether you believe in a heavenly death sentence or not, seem to have been sort of slotted for difficulty in life, right? Things that may be beyond their control, they're at risk. So I think if you work with people like that, I think it's helpful to try and help them build a fence around themselves. And again, this helps them and it also helps you. Deuteronomy 23:18 says, "There shall not be a promiscuous woman among the daughters of Israel, and there shall not be a promiscuous man among the sons of Israel." So this commandment is clear and equal. No woman and no man should be promiscuous sexually. I think it also refers to promiscuity in more general sense, like overindulgence in different things that are maybe not good for you, like gambling or sex or who knows what. Anything that's bad. Eating, shopping, anyway, acquiring debt. There's a lot of ways to be promiscuous. And I think most of us would agree that this is good advice. And because promiscuity it's immoral, it's also not healthy, physically or spiritually. Yet we're vulnerable to it. And where it can really come up is, with just to talk about physical promiscuity, that even if you're not hopping from bed to bed, people in recovery can sometimes find themselves in a sexually compulsive or out of control romantic situations, compulsive romantic situations where people are, sort of compulsively pursuing new relationships or becoming obsessed with other people romantically. And, the pattern can be that what's really happening is you're transitioning from one addiction to another. Like you stop drinking, but all of a sudden somehow you start suddenly having a completely dysfunctional and unbalanced love life. Or, you stop drinking and you become a compulsive shopper or whatever. It happens, and it's very problematic. It's usually a sign of sort of incomplete recovery, and it's just something to watch out for because, addiction is very cunning and baffling, as we say. And, one interpretation of addiction is it's really sort of a brain chemistry illness. So if you need the excitement, let's say that you're used to, taking drugs and getting some kind of high off of them, that when you stop having that, you might be craving that sort of high, and so you might be able to mimic that high by betting or shopping or whatever, like or having sex or other activities that are sort of exciting, and you run the risk of falling back into an addictive pattern, which in some cases will lead you back to your basic addiction. I've heard that story a bunch of times. So I think that in general, in early recovery especially, move slowly in the romance department. Move slowly into activities that you think are slippery, like excessive spending or gambling and that kind of thing.
You've been listening to the For I Will Be With You podcast. Daily reflections on recovery from the Bible. www.foriwillbewithyou.com